In a peaceful land in the central United States, there was a farmer named John Carter. He had been devoted to his vast land for 50 years, a dedication that was reflected not only in his daily work but also in his quiet contributions to the country. John's farm was not simply a piece of land for farming, but a family legacy, preserved through 3 generations. Carter Farm was not only where he raised his family, but also an integral part of U.S. military history. Since John's grandfather decided to turn the farm into a training ground for the military during World War II, the Carter family has poured their heart and soul into serving the country. Their farm became a place where young pilots practiced flying skills at night, honing their ability to fly under low-light conditions. John continued this work week after week, whether it was during the harvest season or their downtime, ensuring the training area was maintained, preparing lights, and making sure all equipment was ready for the pilots' night flights. Emma, John's loving wife, was not only a skilled homemaker but also an important part of this journey. Every night, when the pilots began their training, Emma would prepare sandwiches and hot cups of coffee, providing them with motivation during the difficult hours. "We can't let these boys fly on an empty stomach," Emma would often say, and everyone could feel the love and care the Carter family had for them. This farm was not just a piece of a farmland, it was a symbol of sacrifice, where the efforts of one family helped train thousands of pilots. John Carter and Emma created a training environment full of passion, a home that not only nourished their family but also nourished the heroes of the country. Their entire lives were dedicated to this land, not for personal gain but for the quiet service to the nation. The life of John Carter and his family had passed peacefully for many years, but then a great storm arrived, not from the sky but from real estate developers, shaking everything to its core. A large company from Silicon Valley, with ambitions to expand its high-tech campus, bought up most of the land surrounding John's farm. And when this company discovered that John's farm was right in the center of their development plan, they decided to buy his land. The offer the developers made to John was very tempting. They promised to pay him above market value, an offer that no one could refuse. But for John, this wasn't just about selling land, it was about selling a part of his family's memory, a part of their soul, a legacy that had been built over 3 generations. Not everyone understood the true meaning of this land. It was not just a farming area or a place where he could make a living, but also a significant military training site for the country, a place where thousands of pilots had once trained and grown. John thought long and hard, but in the end, he decided not to sell. His farm was not a commodity that could be traded for money. It was an irreplaceable part of American military history, where his ancestors had fought in World War II, where he had continued training pilots from the Vietnam War to modern-day conflicts. "No amount of money can replace my family's contributions," John told Emma one evening as they sat together, looking out over the vast fields. However, the developers didn't give up easily. After John refused their offer, the developers continued to apply pressure. They started threatening to force him to sell through zoning laws and real estate development regulations. They argued that land transfer was inevitable and that the economic benefits would far outweigh what John was holding on to. "Your land is just a piece of land. It's nothing important," one of the company's executives said during a meeting. John felt like he was being cornered, where the only choice seemed to be to sell his land. His neighbors had already sold their land to the developers. This scene made John feel like he was alone in this battle. He sat in the kitchen with Emma, looking at the offers from the developers, feeling his heart ache. Would the night training zones he and his father had built, the training aircraft flying through the night, be wiped out and replaced by skyscrapers? Would all those years of dedication be in vain? Every night, John would walk around his land, quietly checking the training lights he had maintained for years, inspecting the footprints in the soil, the worn paths that the training planes had left behind. He couldn't stop thinking about the young pilots who had flown over this land, the ones who had learned life-saving skills right here. "We can't lose this," he told himself, but he could do nothing but watch as the landscape slowly changed. When John hung the sign that read "Military Training Zone Closing" on the farm gate, he felt a deep sadness in his heart. That sign was not only an announcement of the training zone's closure, but also an end to a part of his family's legacy. He could accept selling the land and starting over, but he understood that there were values that couldn't be measured by money, and he couldn't let them disappear just because of an offer. Sadness and helplessness surrounded John. Emma also felt pain as she watched him, but they both knew they couldn't lose what had been part of their lives forever. However, both knew that this fight was not just against the developers, but against an inevitable change. When John Carter stood beneath the sign reading "Military Training Zone Closing," he felt as though his entire life was falling into an endless abyss. The sign was not just a piece of paper announcing bad news, but a symbol of a legacy that was gradually fading away. The land that his family had preserved for 3 generations, serving the military through the years of war and training, was now at risk of being replaced by high-rise buildings and modern development projects. However, what John and Emma could never forget was the support from those around them. While many of their neighbors had decided to sell their land, a small group of others still felt a sense of responsibility to the Carter family and the values they had protected for so many years. These people were not just friends or colleagues, but those who had witnessed the sacrifices and contributions the Carter family had made to the country. One morning, after the sign had been hung, John received a phone call from a former pilot, someone he had helped train when he was a hopeful young man. "Hello, John. This is Thomas, the pilot who trained at your farm during the 90s. I heard about what's going on, and I want to say that I'll always stand by your side." Thomas was not the only one. John's story had spread widely within the military community, and many other former pilots called him, expressing their gratitude and affirming they would fight alongside him to protect the farm. But support didn't only come from the military. The residents of the village also began expressing their solidarity. One evening, while John was sitting at home, a group of about 10 villagers came to visit him. They didn't come to complain or criticize, they came to share with him that they were ready to help. They brought food, drinks, and even signs that read "Preserve the Carter Legacy." These villagers were not just neighbors, but people who understood the value of what the Carter family had done for the community and the nation. One elderly villager, Mrs. Margaret, approached and took John's hand, saying, "We know what you and your family have done for this country. This is not just about protecting your land, but protecting a part of history." Mrs. Margaret's words gave John a renewed sense of strength. He realized that he was not fighting alone. John's story began to spread even further when a group of reporters and journalists came to learn about the event. A long article about John Carter and his family was published on a major news website. The story of a patriot farmer determined to protect his land despite the threat from developers gained widespread attention from the community and military organizations. This article not only told the story of John and Emma, but also about the priceless values they protected: patriotism, dedication, and the silent sacrifices that few knew about. Their story touched the hearts of many, not just within the military community, but also among ordinary citizens who understood that sometimes protecting the land was not just about money, but about historical values, tradition, and loyalty to the country. This story was not merely about a fight to reclaim land, it was a fight to protect values that many in society might have forgotten. And through this journey, John Carter not only received support from those around him, but he also realized that he was doing the right thing, something that not only he, but the entire community needed to protect. When John realized that he was not alone in this battle, a new strength rose within him. He was no longer just a farmer fighting to protect his farm. He had become a symbol of sacrifice and dedication that everyone could learn from and follow.
One evening, when the night had settled, John Carter sat alone in the living room of his small home, holding an old phone, his gaze fixed on the window where the training lights still gleamed brightly. Although his heart was heavy with anxiety and uncertainty, he couldn't stop thinking about the years his family had devoted to the country. Suddenly, the phone in his hand rang, breaking the stillness of the night. As he picked it up, a deep, warm voice from the other end of the line spoke. "Hello, Mr. Carter. I am General Michael Harris, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've heard about your story." John almost dropped the phone. General Harris? Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? He could hardly believe his ears. In his entire life, he never imagined he would receive a call from someone so influential. "Mr. Carter, I understand that what you are going through is incredibly difficult, and I want you to know that we will do everything we can to help you. What your family has done for the military over the years cannot be overlooked. I ask you to share with me more details about the current situation at your farm." John sat in silence for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had never imagined that one phone call could change everything. "Sir, this farm is not just land. It's where thousands of pilots have trained, where I have maintained a training zone for young pilots for many decades," John replied, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't let it become part of a development project. It's not just my land. It belongs to this entire country." General Harris paused for a moment, seemingly in thought. Then he spoke. "We can't afford to lose such an important training ground, Mr. Carter. I will do everything in my power to protect your farm. Trust me, you will not face this alone. We will act immediately." After that phone call, John couldn't stop thinking about the words General Harris had said. Perhaps this was the only opportunity to protect not only the land, but also the values he had preserved throughout his life. But he still couldn't understand why someone like General Harris would care about a farmer like him, someone who just wanted to protect the small but incredibly valuable things for the country. The next morning, as the light of dawn poured through the window, a familiar sound of helicopters echoed through the sky. John stepped out of his house, looked up, and saw an Apache helicopter flying by, followed by 3 Black Hawk helicopters. At that moment, he realized something incredible was happening. These helicopters weren't from training pilots. They were from the U.S. military, and they were landing on the land that John had defended for so many years. As the Apache landed, 2 military generals stepped out. John couldn't believe his eyes. This wasn't a routine training session. It was an official military visit to protect his farm. One of the generals approached him and said, "We're here to help you, Mr. Carter. We will protect this farm and turn it into an official military training facility. Your land will be safeguarded and cannot be encroached upon by developers." At that moment, John felt a relief he had never known, but his heart was still filled with astonishment. How could this be? He wondered, but there was no time to think further. The helicopters landed, and the military generals began working with him. They brought with them important documents to make Carter Farm a protected military training facility, with a lease agreement for the training area. This was a perfect solution, protecting his land while allowing his family to continue their daily work. For the next hour, John, Emma, and the military generals sat in the living room, signing papers and discussing how to protect the training area and ensure that the farm would never be infringed upon. What John had thought impossible now became reality. "This is a significant step in protecting the values you've upheld all your life," one of the generals said as they signed the agreement. When everything was finished, John and Emma looked at each other, their eyes filled with tears. Finally, after all these years of struggle, they no longer had to worry about the future of their farm. The military stood by their side, protecting what was most precious to the Carter family, not just the land, but the historical values, traditions, and loyalty to the country. And at that moment, John Carter understood that sometimes, in the most difficult moments, the unimaginable can happen, and the sacrifices of his family had truly been recognized and protected. Since the military intervened in the battle to protect Carter Farm, John felt as though a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He no longer had to worry about selling the land, nor face the sweet offers from developers. His farm was now protected, transformed into an official military training ground where pilots could continue to learn and hone their vital skills. However, something unexpected happened the following morning. When John woke up and looked out the window, he once again heard the sound of helicopters. But this time, the noise wasn't from the usual training aircraft. It was from a large military helicopter convoy. A strange feeling rose within him, as if something momentous was about to unfold. When John stepped outside, he saw an Apache helicopter and two Blackhawks landing right on the training field. The military generals he had met the day before were present again, but this time, there were additional senior officers. The atmosphere grew tense as John realized that his battle wasn't just to protect his farm, but had expanded into a broader strategy to protect military training grounds across the country. One of the generals approached and said, "Mr. Carter, we need your support to protect not only your family's land, but also other vital training sites in the area." John was surprised by this. Not only was he protecting his own farm, but now he was becoming part of a national defense strategy. "We need your help in safeguarding this training site from encroachment by developers and other commercial projects," the general continued. John could never have imagined that his small battle would lead to a significant shift in how the military viewed the importance of training areas. Sites like Carter Farm weren't just places to train pilots, they were critical components in the country's defense strategy. As John sat down with the military generals to discuss, stories of past military training and the heroics of pilots who had trained at the farm were shared. John had trained pilots who had fought in major wars, from the Vietnam War to missions in the Middle East. He had helped them develop the skills to fly under the toughest conditions. The soldiers he trained had become heroes, now defending the nation. The general added, "We will work with developers and the government to ensure that these military training sites will be protected permanently. Your land and the land of people like you will no longer be threatened." These words brought John a sense of relief he had never known. He understood that he wasn't just fighting for land, he was fighting for a critical part of national security. After completing the paperwork, John felt as though he had accomplished something monumental. Not only had he saved Carter Farm, but he had also contributed to national defense. However, John realized that this victory wasn't just about him. It was a victory for the whole community, those who had stood up for what was right. That same day, the military held a meeting with real estate developers, demanding that they alter their plans. "We've protected these training sites for national reasons," the military representative told the developers. "Your projects will not be carried out in these areas. This is an unchangeable relationship." The developers initially resisted, but when the military presented evidence and national defense policies, they had no choice but to accept the terms. John's small battle not only protected his family's land, but had also changed the way military training sites were managed and safeguarded. Carter Farm had now become a symbol, not only of one family's sacrifice, but of patriotism and relentless dedication. John stood by the window looking out at the training ground, where planes once again began to carve through the sky. He felt a profound sense of pride, knowing that he had done something significant, not just for his family, but for the future of his country. And in that moment, John Carter understood that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about money or land, but about the intangible values we protect.
Finally, after months of struggle, John Carter felt a deep sense of relief. Carter Farm stood firm, not just as a farm, but as a symbol of the protection of intangible values that few could see. John had not only protected a piece of land, but he had helped safeguard a part of the nation's history, a legacy that the military and pilots had dedicated themselves to for decades. Looking out the window, where helicopters continued to fly over the training grounds, John felt a profound sense of pride. He no longer felt worried or uneasy about the future of his family and the farm. The training lights, still shining brightly every night, were now not just tools to help pilots train, but symbols of sacrifice and the bond of community. Emma, sitting beside him, hadn't taken her eyes off what was unfolding. Together, they had built a life, a family, and a farm. But now, Carter Farm was no longer just theirs. It had become part of a larger story, a story of patriotism, sacrifice, and loyalty to the country. John and Emma continued with their daily work, maintaining the training grounds and preparing hot meals for the young pilots. But every time he saw the planes land, John was reminded of his journey, remembering those late nights when he and Emma helped pilots train, the sleepless nights spent ensuring the safety of those who would defend the country. The story of John Carter was not just the story of a farmer protecting his land, it was also a story of high values we protect, even in the face of great adversity. John proved that sometimes what we do is not for personal gain, but for the greater good of the community and the country. Protecting a legacy is not easy, but if everyone preserves those values, we will create a brighter future for the generations to come. Carter Farm had now become a symbol, a place that not only John and his family, but also the military community and the citizens could look to as a reminder that no matter the challenges, the values of sacrifice, loyalty, and defending the nation are eternal. John Carter had not just protected a piece of land, he had safeguarded a part of the heart of this country, and that was the thing he was most proud of in his life. Day by day, the life of John Carter and his family gradually settled. Carter Farm was not just a farm, it had become an essential part of a larger story, a story of sacrifice, patriotism, and the protection of intangible values. The training planes continued to fly regularly across the sky, and each time John saw them, he was reminded of the difficult days his family had gone through, but also the days filled with pride. He no longer had to worry about the future of the farm, for now it was protected not only by his family but also by the military and the community. The pilots who had trained there would continue to carry the values that he and Emma had instilled over the years, and Carter Farm would forever stand as a symbol of loyalty and dedication, a part of the legacy that future generations must protect. John looked out the window, where the training lights still shone brightly under the night sky. He knew that he had done the right thing not just for his family but for the country and future generations. Sometimes, in difficult moments, intangible values like patriotism and sacrifice become great forces that help us overcome any challenge. The story of John Carter was not just about protecting a farm. It was the story of safeguarding what is important and cannot be measured in money, about a family who did everything for their country.